Okay, let's start now. How can you make the literature of your study more related to each other? Now, one of the technologies we have developed in the 21st century is digital technology. Class, we are so lucky right now. Nganong makaingon ta nga lucky ta? Lucky kay ta nga generation. Class, kato mga gabuhat og thesis sa unang panahon, no? Sige daw be. Do you have any idea how they gathered the data sa una? Sige daw. Yung sa nila pagkuha yung data nila. Kaya kita karon, we can search on the internet because we have technology right now. So sa unang panahon, yung sa nila. Very good. According to Julia, by using books at saka sa library. Di ba, uy, class hago kay mo atong library, tanawon pa nimo dito sa to nga pangalan, Filipiniana section, circulation section, magazine, di ba, basta mubasa pa jud ka. Unlike karon, we are so lucky right now because of the technology that we have right now, the advancement of the technology. Yeah, we should be thankful. And by putting keywords only, lalabas na yung result, and we can easily determine or like scanning, no, the given paper, no, unlike sa mga sa unang panahon, no, basahon nila ang libro, like kakapay basa, uy, di ba? Again, we are so lucky right now. So take note, with so many different texts, various articles and readings to choose online, okay, it's difficult to select relevant readings that are related to your research topic. Okay, even though na technology man, I mean, pwede tayo maka-search, but again, lisod pa gihapon, no? Lisod gihapon mo identify of possible literatures that are related to your topic. Even pag search karon mo gawas, basahon pa nimo. Pagbasa nimo ay di man related. Basta na pod, di ba? Lisod gihapon basta na technology. How much more sa unang panahon na wala, di ba? Kaya nga we are so lucky right now. Kasi for me, it lessen, no, na kuan gamay ang burden actually. And having this one, we can access different literatures. There are more literatures nga karon compare sa una. Now, in doing research, especially in creating literature review, you have to use technology wisely. Okay? Creating, searching, and citing. Take note, citing valid sources. Citing valid sources from reputable journals. Because class, naglalabasan na ngayon yung mga what we call predatory journals. Kaya nga, I've mentioned always that you need to look into reputable journals. Especially Scopus citedness index ng mga journals, because that article from Scopus are very reliable. Now, it does not only make your results or your study more credible. Of course, the data that you will review from relevant and related sources of the information will serve you as venues to explore deeper into your topic in your research. Now, what is the learning objective of this lesson? You are going to differentiate primary at saka secondary sources of data, and you need to select relevant literatures for quantitative study. There are two different sources of data, no? Two different sources of data. We have what we call primary and secondary sources data, and we will discuss that one isa-isa. How do you select relevant literatures for your study? Now, kamo daw, paano kayo mag-select? Kung kamo mo gamit ng internet, how do you select? Ano lang ba mo kanang nagatanaw ra ba mo sa blog, sa mga blogspot.com, mga Wikipedia? Are you using that one? Again, let me remind you, do not make that one as sources, because that is less credible. Kasi for me, the more credible sources are those journals or articles that are from reputable journals. Yeah, pwede mga articles, that's correct. Articles, but you need to make sure that these articles are credible talaga. Now, let's discuss primary sources of data. Yes, very good, Chanel. According to Chanel, mag-add to sa Google Scholar, sir, then tapos mag-filter ng year, like iset ang range ng acceptable lang sa RRL. I've mentioned also last time that it must be 10 years ang gap. It should be 2012 and above. Again, it should be 2012 and above, and theories are accepted, no? Again, theories are exempted to that year. I mean to the yung year. Now, let's discuss primary source of data. Okay, it includes first-hand evidence of the literature. Again, primary source of data are first-hand evidence literature. These materials include published research on academic journals. These are also original copies of theses and dissertations. Again, these are also original copies of your thesis and dissertation. Kaya nga, kung mo library, pwede mo maka-ask no og copy sa thesis no because you can cite the thesis. Okay? And there is a proper citation no proper citation kung mag-cite mo og thesis or dissertation. Na proper na. Again again, first-hand evidence, just like original copies of theses and dissertations. Also, this includes original sources of textual, tabular, graphical, or statistical data and mathematical models. Now, researchers use primary source of data to explore specific details and other findings that were not wholly reflected on the secondary sources of data. And primary sources of data can give authoritative and credible support for the findings of your study. Grabe ang impact ng mga primary source data because these are very credible talaga. Take note, for quantitative studies, it's important to gather statistical data from primary sources of related literature. Now, in quantitative research, statistical findings are key elements of good literature review, which are originally found in primary source of data, while secondary source of data offer summaries of these findings that serve as useful quick references for your study. Again, example, original publications, research thesis and dissertation, field notes of field researches, spreadsheets with raw data and experimental results. So here are some examples in selecting relevant primary sources of data. Suppose your study is about the relationship between the income of sari-sari store and motivation of sari-sari store vendors. Again, your study focusing on the relationship between the income and the motivation of sari-sari store vendors. So you need to borrow the journal accounts of the sari-sari store vendors in order to get the first-hand evidence of their income. So that is example of primary. Take note, you need to consider confidentiality of the data. Take note that is a confidential document. So you need to have a permission first, or a waiver allowing you to extract information from these kind of documents. Also, some sari-sari stores do not necessarily have journal accounts. So if your study is about difference, another example. If your study is talking about the comparison of the proposed fertilizer and commercial fertilizer, of course, you need to look for a related observation. You need to conduct an experiment in which there are certain group of plants using this kind of fertilizer, and there is another group of plants using this kind of commercial fertilizer. So it shows the growth of different types of plants using various fertilizer. So that's experimental, Another, in such studies like perceptions of students on using ebooks as opposed to traditional books, you need to search for research papers or theses or dissertations about student preferences on the use of learning material. Now, mauna ang isa sa mga reason, class, take note of this one, kung magpa-hardbound na mo sa inyong research, maunang isa sa mga reason nga nung mangayo ang library og copy. Again, that is the reason why nga nung ang library mangayo og copy sa inyong research or thesis, it's because they will use your research no as one of the primary sources of data. Ibutang na nila sa library. Then i-gather they will use your research, the content no, the abstract of your research no will be putted on the system of the library. So pag research ana no gawas ana, mugawas sa system sa library, uy, naay literature nga pwede magamit. Pag-click nimo ay thesis. Actually, pwede siya gamiton. Okay? Pwede siya because that is primary sources of data. Now, take note of this one. Primary sources of data can be used to support the findings of your study in Chapter 4. But in SPC, Chapter 4 pala, Chapter 4, tama. Chapter 4. Again, primary sources of data can be used to support the findings of your study in Chapter 4. Last, the secondary sources of data refers to the interpretation of the data and summaries of results from primary sources. Again, it refers to the interpretation already, no, and summaries of results from primary sources of the data. So these interpretations may be in the form of syntheses, summaries from academic books, encyclopedia, synopses, and descriptions of works or art. Take note that this kind of source of data help researchers in gaining a wider background of knowledge. And these secondary sources of information are very important, as this data, it will help the researchers Okay, let's continue. Sorry for the delay. Now, again, these secondary sources of data are, it will help the researchers, access the primary sources of data that are not available. Take note, primary sources of data are, there are cases that these primary sources of data are not available. Dili siya dali makuha. But these secondary sources of data, it will help you, kung dili nimo makuha ang primary, you can use this secondary sources of data. Again, because not some of the primary sources of data are not available to the public, or should I say it is very difficult to examine due to the proximity of the original data. And here are some examples. And here are some examples of secondary sources of data. And this will summarize, this will summarize the examples of primary sources at saka secondary sources of data in quantitative research. And that concludes our discussion of this one. We will continue our discussion next meeting. Now we will discuss the continuation of this lesson. Again, now we will discuss the continuation of this lesson, especially in writing review of related literature. But again, this time you have the idea already what could be the possible sources that you can use, especially in writing in your review of related literature. You can use primary sources of data, or you can use secondary sources of data. And that concludes our discussion this morning.